So now that we've come pretty far in the topic of functions, we now have a general idea what is a function. It's just like a machine, right? There's an input that goes into this called function, and this function changes the input. How? By performing mathematical operations in it. That can be addition, subtraction, multiplication, and many more functions. There can be logarithm, which you'll learn later on your high school. And after performing that mathematical operations, the function gives out an output, right? And we know by a fact that this input and output are nothing but numbers. Well, numbers and variables. Variables are just numbers which you don't know a value of, and those are the inputs and outputs of a function. Then we went and looked at an example. The example said there's a function which multiplies the input by a factor of 2. So what it does, it takes the input, it does a times 2 to the input. That means it takes the input and it gives an output of input times 2. Or we can say, as variables are used in place of inputs and outputs, we can say the generally used variable for input, x, goes into the function and gives out an x times 2, the input times 2. This x times 2 will also be known as y, which is generally used for outputs. So by this, we can conclude one thing, that function performs mathematical operations on input to give an output. An output is nothing but input with some mathematical operations in it. Okay, so now that we have a basic theory or basic knowledge of how a function works, right? We want to know how to express a function. How are we going to solve a function question if it comes in our tests? How are we going to write a function and perform our steps on that to get to an answer? Well, that's what we're going to learn now. We're going to learn how to express a function with the use of our same old example, the function which multiplies the input by a factor of 2, right? X goes into the function, gives out an x times 2, which is also known as y, right? And then we have a table as well. If we put values of x here, we can assume any value of x and we will get a related output, a related value of y, or which will be x times 2. For 1, it will be 1 times 2, or 2. For 2, it will be 2 times 2, or 4. For 3, it will be 6. For 156, it will be 312. And you can take any number here. You can go up to any number you want, and you will get a related output here. You can take hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, any number. But my point is, how will you express this function? Well, there are 3 ways of expressing a function. We're gonna look at the first way right now, which is our y method. Our y method. Y is, as you know, a generally represented variable for our output, and we can express the function with the use of y. We can just say our output, or our y, is equal to whatever this function is doing. I know that this function is multiplying the input by a factor of 2. Therefore, this function will be multiplying the input, which is my x, by a factor of 2. So times 2. And that's how I express the function by using y method. My output here, which is y, is equal to my input times 2, as represented in the question. And that's my first way to express a function. Here, I can also find values. I can also put in values for my x, or for my input, as I did in the table. I put 1 here, 2, 3, and up to 156, and I said any number. I can do that here too. I can put any number for my x here, and I can get the number or the value of my y for my output. Let's try putting some values. Let's try putting x equals 1, as I did here. X equals 1, I got y equals 2. Let's see if I get the same thing. Well, if I say x equals 1, in this equation, my x would change and become 1. Therefore, I can rewrite it as y equals 1 times 2. And my y will be 2, which you can say it's the same as the table here. Therefore, my this expression or my this way of expressing the function is correct. Let's try putting one more value. Let's try putting y equals, let's try putting x equals 100. If I put x equals 100, this x here will become 100. And I can rewrite this thing as y equals 100 times 2. And y will be 200. These are all values of my outputs, which I get from simply assuming or putting values for my input, for my x. And that's my first way of expressing a function. Y, it will be the y method, and it will be y equals in something in terms of x, where the x is going into mathematical operations. Here it is going into times 2. So yeah, that's my first way of expressing a function, the y method, where there will be y equals to a equation in terms of x's. Now let's look at our second way of expressing a function.